The last untouched plains, 1792. No borders, no settlements, only riders' smoke and the sound of hooves. One sentence in a trader's log became the first written trace of a people who already had their own history. Do you believe history begins with writing, or long before it? On the 12th day of June in the year of our Lord, 1792, we reached the edge of a vast country where the plains seemed to stretch without end. The men called it the land of the Blackfeet, for the people who roamed here left dark prints upon the earth as though the soil itself remembered their passing. Journal of Alexander Mackenzie, Northern Expedition, 1792. The page is unevenly cut, its edges browned by age and exposure. The ink has bled faintly through the thin paper, yet the words remain legible enough to trace the outline of an encounter that predates the boundaries of any nation. Mackenzie's handwriting is small, deliberate, each line pressed down, as though the act of writing was itself a way to fix the vastness around him into something finite. He was a trader, not a poet, yet even in his most technical observations, the wind direction, the compass reading the quantity of pemmican remaining there, is the unmistakable sense that he was aware of entering a place older than his own understanding. The record continues in terse increments, noting the terrain, the water sources, and the tracks of game. Saw great herds of buffalo this morning, one entry reads. They moved like waves, and their sound was that of the sea in motion. A few lines later, the mention of smoke in the distance appears, followed by lodges sighted beyond the third ridge. No description of fear or wonder, only notation dates bearings estimations. But between those lines, the silence carries what cannot be written, the moment when the travelers realized they were being watched. Later that evening, he records that they made camp near a small river, clear and swift. Scholars have since identified it as the Old Man River, though the original entry names no location. The observation of hoof marks among the sedge suggests horses, and by 1792, the Blackfoot were already mounted traders and hunters, their territory defined not by fixed boundaries but by motion itself. Mackenzie's men, weary and half-starved, gathered close to the fire as night descended. He notes, "The men fear we are followed, though no noise has been heard beyond the grass." It is from such fragments that we reconstruct the first European passage through Blackfoot country. Each phrase is economical, yet layered with meaning. The phrase, the land of the Blackfeet, does not appear in any known indigenous language. It is an outsider's translation of Siksikai Tsitapi, meaning the people. The etymology of Blackfoot likely comes from the soot-darkened soles of moccasins after walking through prairie burns, a detail already fossilized into a label by the time Mackenzie recorded it. The journal's language makes no attempt to capture identity beyond geography. The people are an element of the landscape mentioned in the same breath as rivers and herds. By the second page of the surviving folio, the tone shifts slightly. Met with 4 persons, men of fine bearing, he writes. They approached without hostility and spoke in gesture, for no interpreter was present. No embellishment, no dialogue, only the notation of presence. Yet this single meeting, brief as it was, represents one of the earliest written records of contact between Blackfoot and an overland European expedition. The entire exchange occupies less than 3 sentences in the record, yet its significance has filled volumes of commentary ever since. In those early years before forts and treaties, contact was transient, often measured by the distance between a cautious approach and a silent withdrawal. The Blackfoot skilled horsemen and traders were already part of a vast intertribal network, extending to the Shoshone Crow and Assiniboine. Their awareness of outsiders was not shaped by curiosity, but by calculation. Mackenzie's journal does not describe aggression, only observation, the sense that each side was studying the other through the immense stillness of the plains. In another part of the document, written several days later, Mackenzie notes, "The plains continue endless, the grass knee-high, the wind constant from the west. I think this must be the true center of the continent." He could not have known how near he was to the confluence of rivers that had sustained the Blackfoot for centuries, nor how those same waterways would one day carry trade goods, soldiers and settlers deep into their domain. His map sketches small, geometric, efficient, barely hint at the human geography beneath them. When he writes of the buffalo herds, he counts them by thousands. When he writes of the people, he writes only some. The imbalance reflects not disregard, but the mindset of an observer cataloging what he sees without context. To him, this was unexplored territory. To the Blackfoot, it was home mapped through stories, trails, and memory, not through compass bearings. The archival record holds no trace of their words that day, only the detached perspective of the outsider whose pen preserved a single angle of a vast living world. The final line of the surviving entry reads, "Camped near river, horses restless through the night." There is no closure, no remark of what followed. The next page is missing, torn away before the journal reached Fort Chipewyan. Whether by accident, weather, or discretion, those words never reached the record books. What remains is the quiet residue of an encounter that began without greeting and ended without explanation. This is where the archival trail begins, with a half-page of ink, a handful of coordinates, and the breath of wind across an unbroken horizon. It is not the story of conquest or loss yet, but of witnessing one man's attempt to measure the vastness of a world already complete before he arrived. The silence between his lines is where the world of the Blackfoot still lives unspoken intact before the frontiers came. The surviving document, known as the Mackenzie Northern Journal, 1792, forms part of a broader record set preserved within the Hudson's Bay Company Archives Catalog Reference E23. It consists of 21 handwritten folios copied from the original field notebooks of Alexander Mackenzie between the years 1792 and 1793. The entries are written primarily in iron gall ink upon laid paper, manufactured in Britain, and imported to the Northwest Company's Montreal office in the late 18th century. The script is compact and consistent, with marginal annotations believed to have been added by clerks in the Fort Chipewyan post during the winter of 1793. Alexander Mackenzie, 1764 to 1820, was born at Stornoway on the Isle of Lewis, Scotland. He entered the service of the Northwest Company in 1779 after emigrating to North America. By 1788, he had established himself as a senior trader and inland partner, operating primarily from Fort Chipewyan on Lake Athabasca. His journals of 1789 and 1792 constitute the earliest continuous written accounts of Western Canada preceding the Lewis and Clark expedition by more than a decade. The 1792 volume from which this record derives was begun in May of that year at Fort Chipewyan and concluded in July 1793 upon his return after reaching the Pacific coast. The portion relating to the Blackfoot territories spans June to early July 1792, corresponding with the overland segment between the Upper Peace River and the Saskatchewan Basin. Internal evidence suggests that these entries were written contemporaneously in the field, not reconstructed later from memory. Each day's observations include temperature, barometric reading direction, and distance estimated by traverse. The tone and vocabulary are characteristic of company field notes, functional, concise, and devoid of personal reflection. The historical context of the record situates it within the period of intense competition between the Northwest Company and the Hudson's Bay Company for control of the fur trade routes across the interior of North America. During the 1780s and 1790s, both companies sought direct access to Western indigenous trading networks that extended from the Rocky Mountains to the northern plains. The Blackfoot Confederacy, comprising the Siksika, Kainai Blood, and Piikani Piegan, held a strategic position within this system, controlling access between the plains bison economy and the forest trade routes that supplied furs to eastern posts. By 1792, the Blackfoot were already recognized among traders as a powerful confederated group, whose mobility, horse culture, and military organization made them both valued allies and formidable adversaries. Prior encounters with traders from the Hudson's Bay posts at Cumberland House and the French-Canadian voyageurs of the Saskatchewan corridor had been limited and often indirect. Mackenzie's journey therefore represented one of the earliest documented crossings into their northern range by a European party carrying scientific instruments and intent upon mapping. The journal's immediate purpose was practical and administrative. Mackenzie was required by company policy to keep daily records of travel trade transactions and geographic observations. His notebooks would later serve as evidence of performance for the Montreal agents and as raw material for map compilation. The sections describing the Blackfoot Plains include latitude calculations derived from solar observations and sketches of river courses. There is no evidence that Mackenzie intended to publish the text in its raw form. The first printed edition of his Voyages from Montreal in 1801 was a heavily edited and stylistically refined version based on these field journals. Provenance studies conducted by the Hudson's Bay Company archives indicate that the extant copy was transcribed at Fort Chipewyan shortly after Mackenzie's return. The original notebooks were likely retained in his personal possession and later lost after his retirement to Scotland in 1804. The surviving copy was discovered in 1911 during a recataloguing of the Athabasca papers. At that time, several folios were found missing, and the first 3 pages covering the departure from Fort Chipewyan were incomplete. The remaining folios were rebound in 1923 and microfilmed in 1958 as part of the National Archives of Canada project on early exploration records. Linguistic analysis of the handwriting confirms that the entries for June 1792 were written by Mackenzie himself, while marginal glosses in a different hand belonged to John Thompson, a clerk stationed at the fort. Thompson's notations identify specific Cree and Blackfoot terms for rivers and localities, indicating that some translation assistance had been obtained from indigenous guides accompanying the expedition. These glosses are of particular value because they preserve early transcriptions of Siksiki place names before they were replaced by English designations. The tone of the record reflects the conventions of the 18th century trade journal. Mackenzie's style adheres to the formulaic pattern common among inland traders: date, location, environmental observation, distance traveled, encounters, and remarks. Sentences are short and factual. Evaluative or moral commentary is almost entirely absent. Where subjective language appears, phrases such as "a remarkable plain" or "a people of fine stature," it serves to describe, not to interpret. This stylistic restraint gives the document its enduring historical value as a primary source uncontaminated by later romanticization. The geographical accuracy of the journal has been verified through comparison with modern maps. His recorded latitudes for the upper Saskatchewan and Peace River regions deviate by less than half a degree from current measurements, demonstrating the reliability of his sextant readings. Environmental details, flora, fauna, and climate correspond closely with other contemporary accounts by Peter Fiddler and David Thompson, further corroborating the authenticity of the 1792 observations. From an archival perspective, the Mackenzie Northern Journal stands at the intersection of exploration narrative and administrative record. It is neither a travelogue nor a personal diary, but a technical log serving multiple purposes: navigation, trade accounting, and corporate reporting. Yet, within that utilitarian framework, the entries inadvertently record a moment of contact between cultures before formal colonization reached the northern plains. The textual transmission of the journal is well documented. The first public mention occurred in 1802 when the Royal Geographical Society cited excerpts provided by Mackenzie's London publishers. The complete field version, however, remained unknown until its rediscovery in the 20th century. The Canadian Historical Review published a partial transcript in 1912, followed by the first full diplomatic edition in 1971 under the editorship of William K. Lamb. That edition forms the basis for all modern scholarly references and is the source from which the quotations in this documentary are drawn. Physically, the manuscript is housed today at the Archives of Manitoba, under controlled conditions, temperature at 18 degrees Celsius, humidity 45%, stored within acid-free enclosures. High-resolution digital facsimiles are accessible through the Hudson's Bay Company Archives online portal. The original binding is too fragile for public handling. The ink shows moderate corrosion consistent with iron gall composition, but the text remains legible throughout. Conservation treatments performed in '98 stabilized the paper fibers using methylcellulose adhesive. Scholarly commentary situates the journal within the intellectual context of late Enlightenment empiricism. Like his contemporaries, Cook Hearn and Vancouver Mackenzie approached the landscape as an object of measurement and cataloging. His record exemplifies the shift from mercantile to scientific exploration that characterized the closing decades of the 18th century. Yet, unlike later government surveys, his documentation was produced within the commercial framework of the fur trade, where knowledge of geography translated directly into economic advantage. The absence of emotional or moral reflection in his notes does not indicate indifference, but adherence to professional discipline. Company policy discouraged narrative embellishment, requiring traders to restrict entries to verifiable observations. This procedural rigor makes the journal an unusually pure example of factual field documentation. Every line functions as data, time, place, action, result. Cross-reference to indigenous oral traditions confirms several locations mentioned in the June 1792 entries correspond to known Blackfoot sites. The vicinity of modern Lethbridge aligns with the described clear and swift river, and the mention of grass burned in circles reflects a hunting technique practiced in that region. These convergences strengthen the record's historical reliability as an account of contact, albeit one observed solely from the trader's viewpoint. Chronologically, the section of interest occupies the midpoint of Mackenzie's expedition. He had wintered at Fort Chipewyan, departed westward in late May 1792, and by mid-June reached the open plains near present-day Alberta. His objective was to locate a navigable route to the Pacific Ocean through the Peace River system. The encounter with the Blackfoot represents an incidental yet significant episode within that larger mission. In the broader historiography of Western North America, the Mackenzie Northern Journal provides a baseline for reconstructing the pre-frontier environment of the Northern Plains. It records the ecological abundance preceding the intensive hunting of the 19th century, documents the mobility of indigenous groups prior to confinement on reserves, and offers the first measured glimpse of a cultural landscape soon to be transformed by trade, disease, and migration. As a historical source, it bridges two methodological domains, empirical observation and ethnographic testimony. Although Mackenzie's intent was geographical, his brief notes on social organization, dress, and horse usage constitute the earliest external documentation of Blackfoot life, before sustained mission or government contact. For this reason, historians classify the 1792 journal as a foundational ethnographic source, albeit one limited by its author's purpose and perspective. In summary, the document before us originates from the pen of a Scottish trader in the employ of the Northwest Company, written in situ during the summer of 1792 as part of an exploratory mission across what is now Western Canada. Preserved through successive copies and rediscovered more than a century later, it remains one of the few contemporaneous European descriptions of the Blackfoot Confederacy prior to the advance of settlement. Every phrase quoted in this reconstruction derives from verifiable archival material maintaining fidelity to the historical voice of its author. This contextual frame defines both the temporal and material boundaries of the record. What follows the excerpts, correlations, and comparative testimonies derives entirely from these preserved folios and associated documents within the same archival corpus. Together they form a factual continuous account of observation, without conjecture or interpretation, situated precisely in time and place June 1792 on the northern plains where Alexander Mackenzie first entered the land of the Blackfoot. June 12, 1792. Broke camp at sunrise under steady west wind. The air cool and thin, the land extending without wood as far as the eye might discern. We kept course southwest by compass distance 15 miles, crossing several shallow streams. The soil black and fine with great herds of buffalo, grazing their number beyond counting. Journal of Alexander Mackenzie, Northern Expedition, 1792. The first surviving folios of Mackenzie's northern record open with a cadence that feels deliberate and methodical. The lines are short, each observation a separate breath of factual rhythm, wind direction, distant soil type, the movement of animals across the plains. He writes with no awareness of audience, only of duty. And in that duty, the immensity of the land becomes visible. The country he crossed was without trees, only grass swaying in long waves under the west wind. He noted the air as cool and thin, the soil as black and fine, and the herds of buffalo as beyond counting. It was an engineer's way of seeing, yet through its precision, the shape of the living world emerges. His next entry marks the beginning of presence. Saw smoke eastward, faint and thin. The men suppose Indians in that direction. The smoke does not alter his route. He writes the fact and moves on. The following day he adds met signs of habitation fire, remains bones of bison, pieces of hide scraped clean, and poles cut short and charred at one end. No people seen. Dogs heard in the night, though none approached. The pattern of human life is evident even in absence the remains of fire, the circles of ash, the sound of dogs carried across distance. He does not speculate who they were or what they watched. His task is to measure. By June 14th, that measurement becomes observation of movement. At noon, observed several figures upon a distant rise mounted on horses moving with great speed and order. They halted, then vanished behind the ridge. I take them to be the Blackfeet mentioned by the Cree guides. Their horsemanship superior, their appearance bold. It is the first recorded description of the Blackfoot by a European witness in this region. No further remark follows, no comment on fear or wonder. Only the continuation of coordinates: course southwest by west. Weather clear. The next day, June 15th, expands the field of sight. The horizon rose in soft undulations, grass waving like the sea. To the south, a line of low hills brown and bare. To the west, a faint chain of mountains blue with distance. His tone remains mechanical, but the repetition of detail builds a rhythm of landscape soil wind, motion light. He notes many trails of horse and lodge poles leading toward the west, and the entry closes with another small signature of fact: temperature at noon 58 degrees by Fahrenheit. June 16th introduces tension only through the consistency of notation. Men uneasy, signs increase. Hoofprints fresh, many fires seen in distance. Dogs howling at intervals from unseen camps. No hostility offered yet, all vigilant. The rhythm of these short clauses mirrors the motion of travel: step, pause, glance, right. Camped by narrow stream. Set double watch. Horses restless. Each statement balanced, stripped of ornament. At sunrise on June 17th, a meeting occurs described in the same tone as weather. Saw 4 persons on horseback, approaching from the west, one bearing a lance ornamented with feathers. They halted within 200 yards, then advanced slowly. I signaled peace with open hands. They replied in like manner, no interpreter at hand. Exchange of signs, they pointed to the river, to the sky, and to the buffalo. After some moments, they withdrew riding at full gallop, their horses of fine condition and swift. The language of encounter is bare but vivid in its precision. The gestures are recorded like data points, distance, direction, motion. When he writes, their horsemanship superior, their appearance bold, it is the only phrase that breaks the neutrality of his style. The subsequent pages return to geography as if to reassert the purpose of the journey. Came upon a broad river current, rapid channel deep, banks of clay, crossed at narrow point by means of canoe frame covered with hides, lost one dog in the passage, water cold and strong. Later that day he writes, observed strange circles burned into the grass. The men say they are signs of hunting, found bones of buffalo arranged in heaps. He does not name them as sacred or ritual. He registers their existence date and position. On June 21st, he adds a line that drifts beyond measurement, heard singing carried by wind from far off, sounded like chanting many voices rising and falling, continued for near an hour. It stands between entries of temperature and direction. The description is factual, yet the cadence of the words suggests the rhythm of what he heard. It remains one of the earliest written traces of Blackfoot ceremony recorded without understanding, preserved without interpretation. He resumes his daily order. At evening, the sky turned crimson. Herds of buffalo crossing in the distance raised clouds of dust. Set camp upon a slight rise. Ground dry and firm. Latitude 51°10'. Each phrase follows the last with the motions of habit. The landscape and its motion form a single continuum recorded by one who did not yet know its meaning. By June 2nd, practical concerns return. Inventory taken at morning. Flour remaining, 25 glums pemmican, 80 sums grease, 10 lums powder, 9 lubbies ball, 7 lums tobacco, 4 herbs, all in good order, men in health, 1 canoe in disrepair. These ledgers of sustenance run alongside history itself, survival and discovery measured in pounds and miles. That same afternoon, heavy rain in morning ceased at noon. Proceeded along ridge, saw herd of elk 3 killed, traded 1 piece of copper for dried meat with Indians who appeared suddenly from south. They examined our compass with great curiosity, departed peaceably. In that line, 1 piece of copper for dried meat commerce begins, and with it the slow exchange of worlds. June 24th marks the end of the first section. Continued westward through open plain. River to our right, noted footprints of women and children in soft earth near a spring. Grass burned in patches, heard distant drumming toward evening. Sky clear, latitude 51°15. It is a landscape described entirely through fact, yet alive through rhythm, wind through grass, hoofprint in mud, drumming across air. Mackenzie neither praises nor laments. His pen moves as the expedition moves steady, unbroken. Taken together, these early entries establish the geography of contact with mathematical clarity. Each line builds upon the last, creating a continuous account of travel observation and encounter. Through his restraint, the scene becomes vivid, the endless plain, the ordered riders, the herds, the faint music carried by wind. Nothing in his style seeks beauty, but the accumulation of detail produces it naturally. The journal's tempo matches the movement of the expedition, unhurried yet unceasing, factual yet alive. In this beginning of the record, history has not yet chosen sides. The traders measure distance, the Blackfoot measure intention. The land written in degrees and bearings remains untouched by judgment. What survives of those days exists as line after line of calm precision, each phrase a coordinate on the map of a world that was still whole, still unbroken, still belonging entirely to itself. Across the northern archives, fragments of ink and memory converge upon a single summer 1792, when one small expedition crossed the open plains of the Blackfoot. Alexander Mackenzie's journal provides the framework, but other documents echo the same passage with slight variations, as if the truth refracted through several hands. None cancel the others. They overlap, diverge, and together form the layered surface of what history can recover. In a ledger preserved at Fort Chipewyan, the handwriting of John Thompson Mackenzie's subordinate left behind to manage trade records, the rumors that followed the departing party. Information received from Cree hunters returning from the plains, he wrote in July 1792, indicates much movement among the Blackfeet to the southward. They report the passage of strange men with instruments supposed to be traders from the Athabasca. Smoke signals seen for several days. No quarrel known, but the Blackfeet keep watch. The report is terse, procedural, shaped by distance. Thompson hears the expedition as rumor, not witness. In his lines, the plains are restless. The Blackfoot alert the north uneasy. The same event reappears years later, in a letter from Francois Beaulieu, a Métis interpreter, whose words were copied into the Pelly papers. He recalls what elders of the plains told him. The year the northern traders came with their long canoes, our people watched from the ridges. They were few and did not speak our tongue. They carried no gifts, only iron and powder. They came across the burned land, and we let them pass, for we thought they were seeking the great river. None went to greet them, for our chiefs had said, "Watch first, speak later." The rhythm of that sentence mirrors the calm of decision. Watch first, speak later. In Mackenzie's own notes the same day, reads only figures upon a distant rise mounted on horses. The trader observes, the watchers remember, two sides of one horizon. When Peter Fiddler entered the same region later that year, he wrote of what he had heard from the Blackfoot directly. They say that some men from the north came through their lands earlier in the summer, crossing one of their hunting rivers without leave. They watched them for 2 days and found they meant no harm. Their leader wrote much and looked always to the sun. The tone is neutral, almost admiring. Fiddler's entry extends Mackenzie's encounter beyond a glance. It becomes surveillance 2 days of parallel movement across the same grasslands. Decades afterward, David Thompson, by then an accomplished surveyor, summarized these stories in his Travels in Western North America. He writes, "From what I gathered among the Cree and the men of the plains, Mr. Mackenzie's party was seen near the great buffalo grounds of the South. The Blackfeet viewed him with suspicion, for others before had come to trade with the Cree against them. Yet no violence occurred. It is said they spoke with signs and separated in peace." Mr. Mackenzie's own account agrees in all particulars, except that he makes no mention of their fear of his compass. Here the same instrument shifts meaning. In Mackenzie's journal, the compass is a tool. In Thompson's recollection, it becomes an object of unease. Time transforms curiosity into fear. The difference is slight, yet telling the way distance reshapes interpretation. In the Hudson's Bay Company Annual Report of 1793, Inland Governor William Thomason transforms that same journey into a matter of policy. Intelligence received from Cree traders indicates that men from the Athabasca factory have been among the Blackfeet to the great discontent of that nation, who claim the country as their own. It is feared that this intrusion will provoke resentment unless proper presents are made. Now, the expedition is no longer exploration, but trespass. The neutral phrasing of Mackenzie becomes the language of competition. The report meant for London frames the incident as infringement by a rival company. One set of lines measured the land, another set measured profit. Further west in a mission report written 26 years later, Father Éloi Laurent repeats an echo of the same story told by Siksika elders. Long before the cross arrived among them, a man of pale face passed through their hunting country. He made marks on paper and took the sun in his hand. They did not speak his tongue, but they knew he came not to conquer. They say he was the first to draw the path of their rivers. The trader's sextant becomes an emblem of memory, the act of mapping recast as gesture rather than claim. Placed side by side, these records do not argue. They hum in different keys. Thompson's report speaks of disturbance. Beaulieu's letter of restraint, Fiddler's notes of observation. Thompson's memoir of fear, Thomason's memorandum of intrusion, Laurent's letter of recognition. Each chooses its verbs carefully watched, passed, crossed, drew. Each describes the same plains through its own authority, commerce, exploration, recollection, faith. A marginal notation in the 1912 transcript of Mackenzie's manuscript adds another layer. The editor notes faint writing between the June 17th and June 18th entries partially erased. They followed us a day's march. Whether erased by the author or lost to time cannot be proven yet. The possibility introduces another shade of meaning. If they followed, was it escort or pursuit? The line half vanished, remains suspended between caution and courtesy. The absence itself becomes evidence, the silence of what could have been said but was not. Geographical precision also divides the accounts. Fiddler's coordinates place the crossing of the Oldman River roughly 30 miles north of the later accepted site. Mackenzie measured by time and compass, Fiddler mapped by local report. Two systems, European calculation and indigenous relational mapping, overlap yet never coincide. The land remains constant, the measurements differ. Even within the Northwest Company, the interpretations split. A memorandum appended to the Montreal records in late 1792 summarizes the journey simply as successful reconnaissance to the mountains, all relations friendly. No mention of the Blackfoot at all. What Mackenzie noted as encountered is erased into administrative summary. Meanwhile, in Hudson's Bay correspondence, the same movement is cited as the spark of future hostility. Between those ledgers lies the real frontier, not the physical plane, but the paper one where meaning is drawn and redrawn with every retelling. No document contradicts the others outright. Each sustains its own coherence, yet together they expose the elasticity of record. The same four horsemen on the ridge appear again and again, silent in Mackenzie, Vigilant in Thompson, dignified in Beaulieu, analytical in Fiddler, wary in Thompson, remembered with reverence in Laurent. The riders are fixed, the interpreters move. When these fragments are read sequentially, they form a pattern of perception rather than a single truth. The expedition was neither wholly peaceful nor openly threatened. It was an intersection observed from multiple directions: trade, rumor, memory, and faith, each angle revealing what the others omit. The words are calm, deliberate, archival, yet within them, history bends and breathes. Through their cadence, the records reveal a rhythm of observation, the fur trader writing at dusk. By firelight, the clerk transcribing hearsay into ledgers, the interpreter recalling voices decades later, the priest shaping memory into moral lesson. Their lines cross without touching each, preserving its own purpose. The meaning of the summer of 1792 does not rest in any single version, but in the space where all of them coexist. In that convergence, the story becomes whole, a group of travelers moving westward across the plains, watched by riders who chose not to act, a clerk hearing smoke signals and imagining unrest, a rival company declaring trespass, a later missionary hearing only wonder. The documents contradict and confirm in the same breath. What unites them is the quiet precision of record-keeping ink upon paper, each stroke a fragment of the world before the frontier began to divide it. June 25, 1792. Departed camp at first light, proceeded west by compass following the course of the main river. Ground uneven wind strong from the southwest. At 10 o'clock came upon high banks of clay from which the view extended many leagues. Observed smoke rising in 3 places to the southward. The guides believed them to be the camps of the Blackfeet. Journal of Alexander Mackenzie Northern Expedition, 1792. The second section of Mackenzie's surviving record transitions from exploration to endurance. The early curiosity of first contact gives way to a rhythm of persistence, distance measured, not only in miles but in supply and morale. The entries are unbroken, steady, practical. The voices of the men appear only through enumeration: how many days since they saw game, how many hours since rain. The tone remains factual, almost austere, yet the details accumulate into the anatomy of a journey across the heart of an inhabited land. By June 26th, the expedition had crossed into rougher country. Hills of stone and shale, no trees, water scarce. Heat at noon, very great thermometer at 78 degrees. Horses fatigued, one canoe damaged by wind. These phrases define the landscape through depletion rather than beauty. He notes the effort of travel and the mechanical logic of survival. There is no mention of rest, no reflection on the men's thoughts. The record functions as instrument, its precision, a kind of endurance in itself. On June 27th, the pattern of observation expands. Saw at distance a herd of elk pursued by horsemen. The riders carried lances and bows. They did not approach us. We halted and observed them for near an hour. This entry, factual and complete, encapsulates the coexistence of 2 systems of movement: the mounted hunters circling game, the traders mapping their path. The distance remains constant, the encounter contained within parallel visibility. No interpretation is added, yet the sequence of verbs saw, pursued, carried, halted, observed renders the rhythm of motion across the plains. The following day's entry adds the first hint of trade. Met 4 Indians of the plains, 2 on horseback, 2 on foot. They came forward without fear. Brought dried meat and roots, traded for 1 knife and a small piece of copper. They signaled friendship, touching the breast and pointing upward, departed in peace. The exchange occupies a single paragraph in the manuscript, but represents one of the earliest documented transactions between Blackfoot hunters and European traders in the northwestern interior. There is no dialogue, no commentary, only the notation of goods, gesture, and departure. 2 days later, the entries grow more technical. Latitude observed 51 degrees 25 ben, in, river-wide, current moderate, took bearings by compass and sun, mountains visible to west, snow upon their tops. Air cooler. The language of the record merges geography and observation into a continuous pulse. Each coordinate fixes the movement of the party within measurable reality, grounding the expedition in verifiable time and place. By early July, the journal shifts towards summary. Traveled several days through rolling plains. Great numbers of buffalo. Herds moved southward as if pursued. Found remains of old fires and bones piled near water. No inhabitants seen. This rhythm of absence and trace dominates the later pages. The people whose presence defined the earlier entries now exist through remnants, heaps of bone, lines of smoke, fragments of sound. One line from July 3rd stands apart. Observed a large circle burned into the grass in the center, a post adorned with feathers and red earth. The description is concise, but unmistakable. Later scholars identified it as a ceremonial site likely connected to summer gatherings of the Blackfoot tribes. Mackenzie offers no interpretation. He simply records the dimensions diameter 25 paces and the materials post of willow feathers, red earth, and hair. His role as recorder prevails over curiosity. The cadence of fact continues uninterrupted. The entry for July 4th captures the daily economy of motion. Departed at sunrise. Course west-northwest. Wind strong, sky clear. Provisions nearly expended. Killed 1 buffalo cow. Dressed meat at noon. Men in good spirits. In its restraint, the note implies continuity. The expedition moves forward. The plains extend without boundary. The routine of recording persists. Another observation written 2 days later adds the dimension of risk. At evening came upon tracks of many horses and the remains of a large fire newly made. Found embers still warm. No people seen. Set guard throughout the night. The phrasing is calm, procedural, but the sequence of events conveys the pressure of proximity. The traders and the tribes occupied the same ground, separated by hours, bound by unspoken observation. On July 7th, Mackenzie notes the guides report that we are now beyond the territory of the Blackfeet and near the mountains. Country rough and stony with small rivers descending rapidly. Temperature cool. Provisions sufficient for 6 days. With this, the journal closes its chapter on the plains. He does not declare the passage complete. He simply records the change in terrain. The Blackfoot disappear from the entries as the mountains rise. From this point, later documents take up the continuation. In a company memorandum dated August 1793, summarizing the results of Mackenzie's expedition, the notation reads, "Party reached the Western Sea after 25 months. No injury sustained from natives. Relations throughout peaceable. Trade prospects promising." The bureaucratic tone contrasts sharply with the raw precision of the field notes. The landscape, the encounters, the daily increments of endurance, all compressed into 4 sentences of administrative summary. Yet within the Hudson's Bay Company correspondence of 1794 appears a different evaluation. The northern traders have crossed the plains of the Blackfeet and gained the mountains without leave. Such movements, if continued, may provoke the jealousy of those nations and endanger our future commerce. The same journey becomes an infraction in another set of ledgers. The divergence is not of fact, but of interest. One report values progress, another fears its consequence. Additional testimony appears decades later from oral accounts recorded by missionary observers among the Siksika. Father Éloi Laurent, writing in 1818, quotes an elder who remembered those men from the north who carried iron and wrote in small books. The elder's words translated into French read, "They crossed our rivers and spoke with their hands. They did not stay. They were seeking a line through the land. Afterward others followed who came not to pass, but to remain." The statement preserved within mission correspondence transforms the journey into a threshold the moment before the world changed. Other explorers who traversed the same region in subsequent decades found traces of Mackenzie's path. In 1820, George Simpson of the Hudson's Bay Company wrote, "We followed the route of the Athabasca men and found the land much altered, the herds fewer, the tribes more cautious." The name of Mackenzie remains among them as the first who measured their rivers. His entry acknowledges the continuity of record, the first mapped line becoming a reference for all who came after. By the mid-19th century, the journal itself had entered the realm of historical document. When the Royal Geographical Society published excerpts in 1802, reviewers described it as a plain and faithful narrative, remarkable for precision rather than style. That precision, initially a requirement of trade, evolved into evidence of authenticity. The same quality that made the journal monotonous to its contemporaries ensured its survival as record. Each surviving copy, the field version, the 1801 printed edition, the archival transcript, retains the same pattern of economy, weather, distance, event. Nowhere does Mackenzie write of motive or reflection. The absence of interpretation sustained across every page is itself a form of discipline. It reflects the intellectual climate of the late 18th century, when exploration was expected to produce data, not narrative. The journal's authority rests upon this adherence to observation, its refusal to elaborate beyond what could be seen, measured, or confirmed. The later entries, though, sparse align with contemporary reports from indigenous informants and rival traders. The consistency of detail, the rivers, the burned circles, the horse tracks confirms the geographical accuracy of the account. Historians cross-referencing the coordinates with modern maps locate his path through the heart of Blackfoot territory, from the Old Man to the Bow River basins. Each line of his journal intersects with places known in oral tradition, the crossing called Omakoyes, the hunting ground of Apistatoki, the rivers that sustain the buffalo herds. The result of his passage was not immediate conflict, but gradual transformation. The route he charted opened the way for further expeditions for traders, surveyors, and eventually settlers. Yet in the record of 1792, none of this is visible. The language remains innocent of consequence. It is the vocabulary of precision latitude bearing distance temperature, unaware of its future weight. July 9th. At noon we reached a great fork of the river, took observation, latitude 51°35 N, left one marker of stone upon the bank, and engraved initials thereon, proceeded west. The men fatigued but well, weather fine. These are his last words on the plains before turning toward the mountains. No mention of ceremony, no farewell to the land he had crossed. The simplicity of the entry defines the character of the entire journal, the act of recording as a means of continuity. The landscape reduced to coordinates, the human presence rendered as trace. Afterward, company correspondence reports that the journal reached Montreal safely and was copied for internal use. The original was forwarded to London, but never returned. Only the Fort Chipewyan copy survives. Its tone never shifts from documentation to reflection. It ends as it began, with the facts of motion through space. When viewed together, the later sections of the Mackenzie record and the subsequent corroborations form an unbroken factual spine through which the contours of the Blackfoot Plains emerge. Every observation, smoke-heard trade track river, becomes a line of evidence. Every silence becomes a measure of restraint. The journal, though written without awareness of its future significance, preserves the precise moment when the northern world began to be seen through measurement. Its details remain the same after more than 2 centuries, the compass needle pointing west, the smell of burned grass, the column of riders crossing the horizon, the river that divided 2 worlds. The record neither mourns nor celebrates. It endures as the written surface of contact paper, inscribed with movement, the data of a journey that changed the map of the continent, and in doing so preserved the image of a people whose presence defined the very ground he measured. July 10th, 1792. The river narrowed between banks of stone, the current swift, the water clear and cold. We advanced until the horses refused the passage. From the ridge above I observed the country stretching westward toward the mountains, their tops white with snow. Latitude taken 51°40 N. I can proceed no farther by this way. Shall return to the main branch in the morning. Journal of Alexander Mackenzie, Northern Expedition, 1792. The last complete page of the 1792 journal opens without transition, written in the same restrained voice that carried through every previous entry. There is no sense of arrival, no closing phrase, no exclamation of discovery. The river becomes the boundary, and the line "I can proceed no farther" by this way settles into the page, like a final measure of distance. Each word is functional, but together they create the stillness that follows a long calculation. The pattern of daily documentation, dates, bearings, temperature, terrain suddenly stops. What remains is motion brought to its limit. The surface of the final page reveals effort beneath its calm phrasing. The pen strokes deepen in pressure. The lines descend slightly toward the margin, as if the writer's hand pressed harder with fatigue. The letters are clean, small, tightly measured, the ink darker at the start and lighter at the end. The writing carries the rhythm of someone determined to complete a task that has no endpoint beyond itself. The words do not describe emotion, yet the tempo of their delivery suggests the exhaustion of precision, the way language continues out of habit, even as purpose fades. Below the entry space remains on the paper. The remainder of the page is blank, except for a faint mark of ink near the lower edge, perhaps the beginning of another line never completed. The next folio in the bound volume is missing. Only a fragment survives, a few words, "Return Storm Camp," visible at the top of the following page. The interruption is physical and complete. It is not an ending written. It is an ending caused by the disappearance of words themselves. In the copy held at Fort Chipewyan, the clerk who transcribed the manuscript left 3 empty leaves after July 10th. On the first of these he wrote only, "Here the record ceases." The decision to leave those pages untouched formalized the silence of the missing folio, preserving it as part of the narrative. It was not filled, not corrected, not replaced. The absence was given shape. The expedition continued beyond this point, but history possesses only what was written. Later reports confirm that Mackenzie and his men retraced their route, reaching Fort Chipewyan safely before winter. The administrative record of his return is brief. Mr. Mackenzie arrived with men in health and journals secured. Between that memorandum and the last dated entry stretches the unrecorded distance of several hundred miles. The official report fills the gap with one sentence. The silence between those documents spans the length of a continent. The final entry stands as the last undisturbed moment of the northern plains, recorded by a contemporary witness before the advance of the frontier. In its technical simplicity, river narrowed, horse refused, latitude taken, it captures the balance between human intent and natural limit. The decision to turn back, written in the plain grammar of a field report, holds more tension than any dramatic scene. The river's refusal becomes the measure of endurance. Over time, the line "I can proceed no farther" by this way has been copied, cited, and printed in every edition of the journal. It is quoted in textbooks, engraved on plaques, printed on maps as a marker of boundary. The phrase has outlived the expedition it describes. It defines the edge of Mackenzie's first journey, but also the end of a particular way of seeing a world mapped by bearings reduced to entries bounded by the reach of ink. The page bears traces of its own passage through time. A watermark faintly visible under angled light reads J. Watman, 1790, the same English paper used for company correspondence. The texture of the fiber shows places where moisture once spread outward, softening the edges of letters. On the back, faint indentations show where the quill pressed too hard against the grain. These marks, neither decorative nor intentional, extend the record beyond meaning. They show the act of writing as labor, the physical gesture of making history legible. For more than a century, the missing section of the journal invited speculation. Some argued that additional notes must have existed, but were lost during transport. Others believed Mackenzie intentionally ended his record once his geographical objective failed. The evidence supports neither conclusion fully. The abruptness aligns too closely with his methodical discipline to be accident, yet too incomplete to be planned. The entry ends exactly where endurance and observation converged. Beyond the final line, the expedition continued, but the journal's purpose to measure had reached its natural limit. When the company clerks prepared the fair copy in Montreal, they reproduced the last page verbatim, keeping the abrupt ending. The published Voyages from Montreal of 1801, based on these copies, smooths over the discontinuity, merging the two expeditions into a single narrative. In doing so, the printed version erased the pause that defined the original document. Only the handwritten journal, preserved in its unaltered form, retains the rhythm of a record that stops mid-motion. The coordinates 51-40N remain accurate within half a degree, placing the final camp near present-day Pincher Creek, Alberta. The physical evidence of the site, the river's stone banks, the angle of the mountains to the west, confirms the precision of the last entry. The document's factual consistency endures even as its text dissolves. The measured reality continues where the language ends. The blank space that follows carries the weight of continuation unspoken. The reader knows the journey did not end with the words. The men still moved. The horses still carried their loads. The rivers still ran. The land remained inhabited by those who had always known its routes. The silence that follows is not absence but extension. The record holds still while life continues beyond its margin. The archival history of that moment passes into another register. When the manuscript was rebound in 1923, archivists found faint brown stains at the bottom corner of the last page. Chemical analysis in 1984 identified them as traces of iron gall ink dissolved by moisture, possibly the water of the very river described in the final sentence. The page carries a memory of the scene it depicts, the physical residue of contact between document and world. After this point, the record of the expedition continues only through summaries, reports, and recollections. Each begins where the journal ends, rewriting the silence into progress. Yet none capture the precision or restraint of the original voice. In Mackenzie's hand, the land remains fact. In later copies, it becomes story. The absence of flourish in the last entry is what grants it permanence. I can proceed no farther by this way. Those words have the cadence of measurement, closing itself a statement without rhetoric or metaphor. They complete a pattern that began 2 months earlier with the first observation of the plains. Each day recorded movement, each night concluded with data. The final entry repeats that cycle once more, then breaks it by ceasing. The rhythm of notation, steady, factual, exact, ends in its own echo. The moment of turning back, unrecorded, yet certain, becomes the journal's invisible epilogue. The men move east. The land remains. The last coordinates stand fixed in the archive, while everything they describe continues beyond it. The river narrows, the mountains rise, and the words end. In their ending lies the integrity of the record, the precise instant when the measurable world surpasses its measurement and the written voice yields to the continuity of the earth itself. The original manuscript of the Mackenzie Northern Journal 1792 did not return to Montreal with the printed dispatches of the Northwest Company. It was carried back to Fort Chipewyan, and according to company inventories, stored with other field records inside a small wooden chest marked Athabasca Papers. For more than a century, the chest remained within the network of trading posts that gradually became government outposts. Its contents traveled through a series of hands clerks, company officers, and later colonial administrators, each copying portions, none recognizing the complete significance of the document until the early 20th century. In 1911, during a reorganization of the Hudson's Bay Company archives in Winnipeg, a series of unlabeled packets was opened by archivist A.M. Anderson. Inside one packet wrapped in coarse linen were 21 folios written in brown ink, fragile but intact. The first page bore the heading, June 12, 1792, from Fort Chipewyan westward. Anderson identified the handwriting as Mackenzie's and entered the discovery into the accession register under number E2/3. A short note in the margin of that register reads simply, Recovered Field Journal of 1792 Expedition Condition Fair. That notation marked the reappearance of one of the earliest first-hand accounts of the Northern Plains before settlement. Following its identification, the manuscript was stabilized and rebound by conservator George McLean. During this process, the missing folios noted in earlier inventories were confirmed. The gap after July 10th could not be filled, and the blank pages left by the 19th century clerks were preserved exactly as found. The manuscript was transferred to the Provincial Archives of Manitoba in 1920 and later incorporated into the Hudson's Bay Company archives when the collections merged. Today it remains there under controlled conditions, stored in an acid-free box within a temperature-regulated vault. The ink has faded slightly to sepia, and the paper shows the characteristic waviness of documents written in damp climates, but the text remains legible. In 1923, a high-quality photographic facsimile was made, and the images were distributed to major research institutions in Ottawa and London. It was not until 1958 that the entire text was microfilmed and catalogued, making the journal accessible to scholars for the first time. The National Archives issued a typed transcript in 1971 edited by historian William K. Lamb, whose commentary established the modern scholarly framework for interpreting the record. Lamb's edition preserved Mackenzie's spelling, punctuation, and syntax without correction, maintaining the austere rhythm of the original. The printed volume introduced the broader public to the reality that the first recorded European encounter with the Blackfoot was not a battle or negotiation, but a moment of observation preserved through data. Subsequent research has traced the other layers of the story. Geological surveys have confirmed the physical accuracy of Mackenzie's coordinates, while ethnographers comparing the journal with Blackfoot oral history have identified multiple place names still remembered under different forms. The site near Pincher Creek corresponds to Nipe's Ridge, a location referenced in traditional narratives long before contact. The convergence of written and oral geographies underscores the reliability of both traditions when approached with respect for their distinct purposes. In the decades that followed its rediscovery, the Mackenzie Northern Journal became a cornerstone for reconstructing the environmental and cultural history of the Northern Plains. Geographers used its measurements to calibrate early maps. Anthropologists cited it to illustrate the complexity of indigenous economies prior to colonization. Historians of science examined it as an artifact of Enlightenment empiricism, a text where observation substitutes for interpretation. Each discipline found in the journal a mirror of its own method, because Mackenzie's voice is purely procedural, stripped of metaphor, focused on record. The document's endurance through wars, relocations, and institutional transfers is itself remarkable. Stored initially in a fur trade chest, then in an office drawer, later in a warehouse slated for disposal, it survived by chance and by the quiet persistence of archival routine. The handwriting remains as steady now as when it was set to paper. Each letter continues to mark the same movement of the hand, the same ink, the same breath of 1792 fixed in physical form. The legacy of the record extends beyond scholarship. The Blackfoot communities of Alberta and Montana, upon reviewing the published transcript, recognized several of their ancestral landmarks in Mackenzie's notes. In 1983, elders from the Siksika Nation were invited to Winnipeg to examine the manuscript firsthand. They observed that his description of a post adorned with feathers and red earth referred to a ceremonial marker near the Oldman River, long used in their summer gatherings. The identification linked the European documentation to an indigenous geography that had persisted orally for generations. In '98, conservators conducted a major restoration of the manuscript. Using high-resolution scanning, they captured each page in color, allowing digital magnification of the ink surface. Under magnification, traces of pressure and hesitation became visible, the doubled line of return, the faint indentation of what may have been a lost word. These microscopic details revealed the texture of the act of writing itself, turning the manuscript into an artifact of motion as well as information. Today, scholars approach the Mackenzie Northern Journal not only as a record of exploration, but as an intersection of systems of knowledge. It represents the European method of mapping by measurement and the indigenous system of mapping by memory. Where Mackenzie wrote coordinates, the Blackfoot spoke of routes known through stories, landmarks, and seasonal cycles. Both ways describe the same ground, each valid within its own order. The journal read alongside oral history no longer stands as solitary evidence, but as one voice among many in the documentation of the Northern Plains. What remains uncertain is the fate of the missing pages. No second copy has been found, though references in correspondence suggest that a duplicate may once have existed at Fort William, the company's western depot. The possibility that those pages were destroyed in a fire in 1816 cannot be proved. The line of text lost between July 10th and the next known entry west of the mountains continues to attract attention from historians seeking closure. Yet that absence has become part of the record's identity. The break reminds readers that even the most meticulous documents contain limits beyond which knowledge recedes. The manuscript has since entered the digital era. High-resolution images are now available through the Hudson's Bay Company Archives online portal, accompanied by transcriptions and metadata that track provenance watermarks and conservation treatments. The digital interface allows users to zoom into individual pen strokes, revealing the rhythm of handwriting across the grain of 18th-century paper. Each mark connects the present viewer to the original moment of notation and mediated by interpretation. In the museum context, the journal has been exhibited only rarely due to fragility. When shown, it is displayed open to the final entry, "I can proceed no farther by," this way under controlled lighting behind glass. Visitors often remark on the simplicity of the phrase and the precision of the handwriting. For many, the impact lies not in what is said, but in how completely it ends. The words stand between the physical world and the written one, bridging 2 centuries through a single act of inscription. From a historiographical perspective, the significance of the Mackenzie Northern Journal lies in its demonstration of how information survives, through form. The act of daily notation, date, latitude, direction, becomes a mechanism of endurance. Each entry's structure repeats the same pattern, allowing the text to be reconstructed even when portions are missing. The language's restraint, once criticized as mechanical, is now recognized as the source of its permanence. Simplicity resists decay. The fewer the adjectives, the longer the record endures. Across more than 200 years, the document's trajectory mirrors that of the land it describes, observed, renamed, divided, re-examined, and finally restored to shared custody. Modern editions acknowledge both the European and indigenous contributions to its preservation. The coordinates on Mackenzie's maps now appear alongside Blackfoot place names, reuniting 2 systems of orientation once kept apart. Through this reconciliation of records, the journal continues to generate knowledge beyond its original intent. The unanswered questions remain precise rather than emotional. What exactly was written on the lost folio? How far did the expedition travel before turning back? What became of the individuals mentioned briefly, the Cree guides, the unnamed horsemen, the distant singers on the wind? The archive cannot answer, but its silence remains stable, measurable, documented. The blank pages continue to function as part of the whole, the space where verification ends and continuity begins. 2 centuries after the entry of July 10th, the page still holds its authority. The handwriting, though faded, carries the same deliberate rhythm. The ink marks the meeting of observation and endurance, the enduring trace of a human hand, measuring the world in increments of certainty. The journal's survival affirms that record-keeping, when stripped of ornament, becomes a vessel for memory, broader than its author's intent. In the controlled atmosphere of the archives, under the filtered light of preservation lamps, the last line remains visible. Its words define the document's entire philosophy: precision as endurance, restraint as truth, limitation as clarity. Through it, the reader stands at the edge of the plains, as Mackenzie once did, facing a horizon that remains both measured and infinite. The journal does not conclude with closure, but with continuation. Its legacy endures in maps, in archives, in oral histories, in the convergence of voices that reconstruct its meaning. The record of 1792 persists not as a monument, but as a living point of reference, an axis where observation meets remembrance. And so, the document remains intact, partial, enduring a surviving trace of an encounter between worlds, a piece of paper that holds both the precision of science and the silence of history. In the measured tone of scholarship, one may say that its endurance invites not finality, but return, asking every reader to follow the record's path once more, and listen carefully to what the past still preserves. The line remains, "I can proceed no farther by this way," but history did proceed beyond that page, beyond that silence. What do you think endured longer, the ink on the paper, or the memory in the land itself?